They made me sleep in the attic room where the cook once died of consumption. My husband's family thought it appropriate. After all, I had brought no fortune to the marriage, only a modest education and a face that had once pleased him. The November rain fell against the narrow window above my bed, each drop a whispered reminder of my place in this house. Below me, 3 floors of warmth and gaslight. Above me, only the slate roof and the indifferent sky. The room smelled of old wood and lavender sachets left by previous occupants, women whose names no one remembered. I was 23 years old, and I understood that I was being erased. My husband, Edmund, had seemed different during our courtship. He had quoted poetry in my aunt's parlour, praised my watercolours, called me discerning. But courtship is theatre, and marriage is the closing of the curtain. 6 months after our wedding, his mother arrived to take up residence. Within a week, I had been moved from the 2nd floor bedroom to the 3rd floor. Within a month, to the attic. His mother required the space, you understand. Her nerves were delicate. Her sleep was precious. I should have protested. But I had been raised to believe that marriage was surrender, that a woman's will was meant to bend like green wood, never breaking, but always yielding. So I carried my belongings up the narrow servants' stairs, past the housemaid who would not meet my eyes, past the portraits of Edmund's ancestors who seemed to watch my ascent with cold satisfaction. The attic room held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. No mirror, no escritoire, no space for the person I had imagined I might become. Each evening, I would sit in that chair and listen to the sounds of dinner below, the clink of crystal, the murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of my husband's laughter at something his mother had said. They did not call for me. I was not missed, but I was not idle. In the mornings, before the household stirred, I would descend to the library. Edmund's father had been a man of business, methodical and ambitious, and his books remained, untouched, unread, gathering the fine dust of disregard. I began with the ledgers. I taught myself to read the language of accounts, of investments, of property law. I discovered that this house, this prison of polished mahogany and Persian rugs, was not as secure as its inhabitants believed. The estate was entailed, yes, but there were debts. Edmund's father had speculated poorly in railway shares. The annual income was diminishing. The house itself was mortgaged, though Edmund's mother spent as though the coffers were bottomless. She ordered new drapes. She hired additional staff. She hosted elaborate dinners for families whose approval she craved. I watched. I calculated. I waited. The fracture came on a January evening during one of my mother-in-law's dinner parties. I had not been invited to attend. I never was. But I heard the commotion from my attic room. Voices rising. A woman's sharp cry of distress. I descended the stairs, compelled by some instinct I could not name. In the drawing room, I found chaos. A guest, the young wife of a banker, had fainted. The other women fluttered about her like agitated birds. Edmund stood useless by the mantelpiece. His mother commanded the scene, directing servants, demanding spirits of ammonia, declaring that the poor dear had always been frail. But I saw what the others had not. On the floor beside the settee lay a letter, half concealed beneath a cushion. I bent to retrieve it, and in that moment I read enough to understand. The letter was addressed to Edmund. It was from a woman in London. The tone was intimate, pleading. She begged him to acknowledge their child. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my pocket. No one noticed. I was, after all, invisible. I returned to my attic room and sat in the darkness for a long time. I did not weep. Weeping is a luxury afforded to women who still believe in fairness. Instead, I felt something settle inside me, hard and bright as a diamond. Clarity, purpose. The understanding that I had been freed from the obligation of loyalty. Over the following months, I began to design my future with the same methodical care that Edmund's father had once applied to his business ventures. I wrote letters, carefully worded, posted from different locations to avoid detection. I contacted Edmund's creditors, offering to purchase certain debts at a discount. I used the small inheritance my aunt had left me, money I had never mentioned to my husband because I had learned early that what they knew they would take. I became acquainted with the woman in London. Her name was Sarah, and her son had Edmund's eyes. She was desperate, abandoned, clinging to the hope that Edmund would one day claim his responsibility. I did not tell her that he never would. Instead, I offered her employment as a companion to an elderly widow in Bath, a position I arranged through connections my aunt had maintained. In return, she gave me the letters Edmund had written to her, promises made and broken, each one a small blade I could use to cut through the fabric of his respectability. I also discovered something else. Edmund's mother, that formidable woman who had banished me to the attic, had a secret of her own. Before her marriage, she had been engaged to another man, a man of lower station whom her family had deemed unsuitable. She had ended the engagement at her father's command, but she had never stopped corresponding with him. The letters were hidden in a rosewood box in her bedroom, tied with a faded blue ribbon. I found them one afternoon when she was out paying calls, and I read every word. They were beautiful letters, full of longing and regret, proof that she had once possessed a heart capable of feeling. I did not judge her for this, but I recognised its usefulness. By spring, Edmund's financial situation had become dire. The creditors I had quietly acquired began to call in their notes. The household expenses, always excessive under his mother's management, became unsustainable. Edmund's investments, guided by his own poor judgment, collapsed. He began to drink more, to spend evenings in his study with the door locked, emerging only to snap at servants or to avoid his mother's increasingly frantic questions about money. I watched it all from my position of invisibility. I had become a ghost in my own marriage, which gave me the freedom to move through the house unobserved, to listen at doors, to read correspondence left carelessly on desks. Knowledge is a form of power, and I was gathering it meticulously, the way one might collect stones to build a wall. The evening of reckoning came in late April, during the season when London society was at its height. Edmund's mother had insisted on hosting one final grand dinner party, an event she believed would restore their social standing. She had invited everyone who mattered, MPs, bankers, titled families who were considering whether to continue their association with a household rumoured to be in decline. I did not attend the dinner, but I was present nonetheless. That afternoon, I arranged for certain letters to be delivered. To Edmund, a package containing his correspondence with Sarah, along with a calm, detailed accounting of the money I had paid to support his abandoned child. To his mother, her own letters to her lost love returned to her with a note written in my hand. I found these in your rosewood box. I thought you might wish to keep them secure, as I have made copies. To the guests arriving for dinner, I sent nothing. But I had ensured that rumours would reach them. Quiet words spoken to the right servants, who spoke to other servants, who spoke to ladies' maids, who whispered to their mistresses. By the time the guests arrived, the air was already poisoned with speculation. I dressed carefully that evening. I had purchased a new gown with my own money, the first truly beautiful thing I had owned in 2 years. It was deep green silk, elegant and understated, the dress of a woman who had nothing to prove. I arranged my hair myself. I looked in the small mirror I had finally purchased for my attic room, and I saw someone I had almost forgotten. Myself. I descended the stairs precisely as the guests were being seated for dinner. The butler, startled by my appearance, had no time to announce me. I simply walked into the dining room and took my place at the table. My place. The one that had been laid out of habit, though no one expected me to fill it. The silence was absolute. Edmund's face drained of colour. His mother half rose from her chair, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. But the guests were watching, and they could not create a scene. Not here. Not now. I smiled at them all, the smile of a woman who holds every card and knows exactly how to play them. Throughout dinner, I was gracious. I spoke when spoken to, demonstrating the education and refinement that Edmund had once claimed to admire. I answered questions about my long absence from society with perfect composure. I have been unwell, I said, but I am quite recovered now. The lie was so transparent that it became a kind of truth. Everyone understood what I was saying. I have been erased, but I will not remain so. Edmund tried to intercede after the soup course, leaning close to whisper urgently that I should retire, that I was embarrassing myself. I looked at him with the same calm regard I might give a stranger on the street. "No, darling," I said, loudly enough for others to hear. "I shall stay. After all, I am your wife." The word wife hung in the air like an accusation. It was during the fish course that Edmund's mother made her fatal error. Emboldened by wine and desperation, she attempted to reassert her authority. She announced with brittle cheerfulness that I had been residing in a quieter part of the house due to my delicate health, and that she hoped the guests would understand my peculiar appearance this evening. I sat down my fork with deliberate care. "You are quite right, Mrs. Ashford," I said. "I have been residing in the attic room where your former cook died of consumption. It is indeed quiet there. One hears everything that happens in the house below, but one is not heard in return. A useful position for observation." The guests shifted uncomfortably. One woman coughed into her napkin. Edmund closed his eyes as though in pain. "I have spent my time productively," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "I have educated myself in matters of business and property law. I have come to understand the financial position of this household rather thoroughly. I have also come to understand certain other matters that I believe some of you might find interesting." I let that statement settle, watching fear bloom across my husband's face and his mother's. "However," I said, turning to address a banker seated across from me, "I did not come here tonight to cause distress. I came to announce that I have recently purchased the mortgage on this house. The transaction was completed this morning. As the holder of the primary debt, I am now in a position to make certain decisions about its future." The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I rose from my chair, the green silk whispering around me. "I will be taking possession of the master bedroom on the 2nd floor," I said. "Mrs. Ashford, you will find that your belongings have been moved to the 3rd floor, where I believe you will find the accommodations perfectly adequate. Edmund, you may remain in your current rooms, provided you conduct yourself with the discretion and responsibility that your position demands." I looked around the table at the assembled guests, these arbiters of society who had tacitly approved my erasure. "I hope you have enjoyed your dinner," I said. "But I believe this will be the last such gathering this house will host for some time. We shall be economising." I walked from the room with my head high, climbed the stairs to the second floor, and entered the bedroom that should always have been mine. The bed was vast and soft. The windows overlooked the gardens. The air smelled of roses and beeswax. I locked the door behind me and stood in the centre of the room, feeling the weight of 2 years lifting from my shoulders. The aftermath was exactly as I had designed it. Edmund's mother departed within the week, taking a small cottage in the countryside with the allowance I determined was appropriate. She took her rosewood box with her, and her secret remained safe, as I had promised it would. I am not needlessly cruel. Edmund remained in the house, diminished, humbled, and aware that his continued comfort depended entirely on my goodwill. He made arrangements for Sarah and his son, providing support that I monitored carefully. He stopped drinking quite so much. He learned to address me with a respect born not of affection, but of necessity. I did not seek his love. I no longer wanted it. What I had discovered was something far more valuable, my own capability. The house became mine in every sense. I managed its finances, restored its stability, and slowly transformed it from a place of imprisonment into something I had chosen. I hired new staff, treating them with fairness. I opened the library to young women in the neighbourhood who wished to educate themselves. I turned the attic room into a study, filled with books and ledgers and correspondence. I never slept there again, but I visited it often to remind myself of where I had been and how far I had travelled. Society whispered about me, of course. I was called peculiar, unwomanly, unnatural, but I was also called intelligent, capable, formidable. And I discovered that I preferred the second set of epithets to the first. Let them whisper. I had learned to stop listening. Now, years later, I sit in my study on the second floor and watch the rain fall against the windows. The house is quiet. Edmund spends most of his time in London now, pursuing business ventures I have approved and monitored. We have reached an understanding. We are not husband and wife in any meaningful sense, but we are something perhaps more useful, partners in the maintenance of appearances. I am 41 years old. I own property. I have investments. I have power. I have myself. Sometimes I think of that young woman who carried her belongings up the attic stairs, who believed that silence and submission were the only paths available to her. I wish I could tell her that there are other ways, that patience can be a weapon, that invisibility can become a disguise, that the very tools they use to erase you can be turned against them. But perhaps she learned it anyway. Perhaps we are the same woman, she and I, separated only by time and understanding. I stand and walk to the window, looking out at the gardens that have bloomed and faded and bloomed again in the years since I reclaimed this house. The roses are particularly beautiful this year. I planted them myself. In the end, revenge was not a single act of destruction, but a long, quiet reclamation of everything I had been told I could never possess: dignity, authority, choice. They thought they could break me by putting me in that attic room. Instead, they gave me the distance I needed to see clearly, the silence I needed to plan, and the motivation I needed to transform. I did not merely survive their cruelty. I purchased the very ground they stood on, and I let them know, with perfect courtesy, that I owned it.